Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Lele. Did my video show up? Because I still see the still image.
Not yet.
Oh,
Try now.
yeah,
Yes.
there we are. Here we are again. As you can see, headsets are fashionable today. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. I wanted to give a little bit of background as the mastermind behind the holiday, or better put, commemoration, Information Overload Day, which I originally called Information Overload Awareness Day. It came out of the same frustration that led me to assist Nathan Zeldes, IORG's president, in the creation of the Information Overload Research Group, which is currently the steward of Information Overload Day. I stumbled upon the topic of information overload rather accidentally about 15 or so years ago, and I was at the time chief analyst at Basics, a think tank, studying how people work with information, and I was trying to figure out what was keeping people from succeeding at working with information. Our research showed some factors which in the shadows led to what we now refer to broadly as information overload. And they also led to some startling figures in terms of the cost of information overload. We announced these figures, and all of a sudden, our research took off. It was rather scary, quite honestly. But it led to the importance of understanding that there's a true and huge cost. Last time we calculated it, information overload cost the U.S. economy $988 billion in 1 year. That was the year 2010. And we saw it growing at a clip of about 7 to 11% annually. So you can imagine what in the past half decade has happened. So I'd like to welcome everyone to joining us. On the first Information Overload Day in 2009, we had so many people attending that we were overloaded in the online conference room we were using. Today, I don't foresee that happening because we've planned for a lot more. I'd like to welcome, I know there are people here from very large corporations and also sole practitioners and smaller organizations, and I think that's a great mix. What I would like to cover before I introduce the rest of what we're going to do today are 5 things we can do, not only today, but for the rest of the day, for the rest of our lives, actually, to help combat this scourge, which we call information overload. The first thing, which happens regularly to me, and these all come out of my own experience as well as our research, is that people email a colleague and then they immediately follow up with an instant message, a same-time message, a text message, or even a phone call, and there you have it. You've probably stopped me from actually trying to address your question right then and there. This leads me to explain one key aspect of our research. I fell upon a phenomenon that I named recovery time. Recovery time is the time it takes someone to recover from an interruption, whether it's someone knocking at the door, ringing the bell. Yes, it could be a Paul McCartney song, or walking in, texting, any sort of interruption, including a self-interruption. The recovery time is 10 to 20 times the duration of the interruption. So what you have here is a huge problem because a 30-second interruption can lead to 100 to 5 minutes of recovery time. When you add it up, we found that information overload was basically taking away 28% of the workday. So if at the end of the workday you've ever wondered where all the time went and why you were not as productive as you were, and 94% of knowledge workers we surveyed in one very large survey said that information overload has basically stopped them in their tracks at one point or another. That's why. So if you're going to email someone, show patience. Second tip is don't combine multiple themes or requests in a single email. Our attention spans with all these things bleeping and dinging at us are very small. Very small. So if you put a number, if you wondered why you sent out an email with a very carefully worded message in paragraph 4, and a bunch of people emailed you back asking exactly what that was, this is why. We also found that most people don't make it beyond the first paragraph and a half. So please keep that in mind. If you're going to send emails, stick to a topic, make it clear. If you feel you must cover multiple topics, explain that in the opening graph. Say, I intend to cover A, B, and C in this email. At least that will alert people to the problem that they're about to encounter. The next tip for today, make sure the subject of your email clearly states what is required. An email with the word help as the subject may or may not elicit the desired reaction. Be specific. Don't put the entire content of your email into the subject, which I've seen people do. Fortunately, that's dying out with dinosaurs, but it's really important to make sure that you clearly state what you're expecting. The next thing I'd like to cover is the little habit a lot of people have, which I'm sure everyone here will smile when I say this, but people reply, especially when there's hundreds of people on the email and they hit reply to all, great, or thanks, feeling they must acknowledge this with a word like great or thanks, adding nothing to the conversation. This is really overburdening people. Whoever's doing the slides, I need the next tip though on the slides, please. Thank you. And it really throws people off, and it's another interruption that we can ill afford. Of course, and I don't even have this on the tips, I guess I thought it was a given, use reply to all judiciously. In fact, choose whom you're sending this to judiciously. In some of my talks, I use a slide from a very large insurance company where typically they would do what was called an all-call email, where over 5,000 people would get an email several times a day from different people that basically ran, does anyone know anyone who knows anything about this or knows this person? 5,000 people. Just imagine what happens when even a couple of hundred people hit reply to all. And finally, my final tip before I turn this over to Nathan, don't get impatient if you don't get a response right away. People are being pulled in multiple directions. I'm being pulled in multiple directions. We all, this is the way it is at the moment. But what we found, or what I found in my book, Overload, and I have a chapter called The Two Freds. I kind of blame Fred Smith and Fred Rogers for this. Fred Smith, of course, is the founder of FedEx. Fred Rogers, of course, is the children's television show host, Mr. Rogers, in the very well-known, at least in some countries, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Fred Smith created an expectation that when you absolutely positively need something overnight, you'll get it. He, by creating FedEx, also created a culture of information, of instant gratification. And Mr. Rogers spent 30 years telling children in North America that they were special. So when you combine those two things together, there's a much greater understanding of why someone is standing in front of you thinking that his request is both urgent and important at the same time. And what you're doing couldn't possibly be nearly as urgent or important. So we've developed a culture that pushes this out, and we're kind of stuck with it. For those of you who are curious, I have excerpts from my book at www.overloadbook.com, and you can access more of the research there, and if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to address them either in the context of the webinar or just if anybody wants to reach out to me. But it's clearly something you have to do at the grassroots level. At some point, you may feel like you're doing this alone, but if you evangelize some of these tips and try and do this, you will slowly but surely make a little bit of an impact. The one thing I'd say, though, by the way, and that's a habit that annoys me greatly, some people tend to BCC a lot of people, which means you can't reply to anyone. And if I'm on the BCC list, that email gets the lowest priority in my inbox in Lotus Notes. So experiment carefully to see what solution will work, because that will make getting this grassroots effort giving this grassroots effort a lot more traction. At this point, out of tips, thank you very much. But I would like to invite my friend and co-founder, Nathan Zeldes, who I named in my book the Intel, because I couldn't figure out what his real title could be other than that. So here is the former information overload czar from Intel and IORG president, Nathan Zeldes.
Thank you. Am I coming through? Hopefully I am. Welcome, everybody. It's good to have you all here with us. I hope you'll enjoy the great lineup of speakers we have today, which will share insights and solutions and ideas that you can use to help you combat your own information overload, maybe lead some change in the others around you. I want to thank NoMail for sponsoring this webinar, and I want to thank IBM for making this Zoom infrastructure available that we're using today. And for those of you that don't know IORG, a few words about who we are. This group was founded, as Jonathan mentioned, by myself and him and some others in 2008 as a nonprofit cause organization, which is run by a volunteer steering committee and board of directors. Everybody are volunteers here. And our mission is to reduce this information overload that is destroying the productivity and the quality of life of knowledge workers, which is another term for me and you and anyone who isn't driving a truck, basically. And these days, even some who are driving trucks. Our mission is to do that. The way we're doing it is primarily as a catalyst. So we're too small to run much research ourselves, but we disseminate know-how and we facilitate conversations. We try to bring together people who can network and discuss and exchange views about this problem. Our main activities include having a website with a resource center where we share pointers to research, posts, news, everything about information overload, and you can go and see it on our site. And we are holding webinars and conferences, sometimes virtually, sometimes face-to-face, where we bring together people from diverse backgrounds. That has always been our strategy from day one, to have people from academia, from big corporations, from small startups, from solution vendors, and consultants and analysts. And by having people with such diverse backgrounds, we create a much more fertile and useful exchange of ideas. And as for you, I encourage all of you to engage with us. You can visit our site. You can join our mailing list, which is guaranteed not to overload you. We have very few postings on the list every year, but we will let you know when we have events or webinars or interesting things going on. And I invite any of you to connect with me and write me and discuss any ideas you may have for improving what we're doing.